A cultura é um dos mais preciosos instrumentos de democracia. É um canal de expressão plural que permite a convivência de diferentes vozes, histórias e visões de mundo. E por isso a cultura, tal qual a democracia, deve ser defendida e fortalecida. Essa é a função da Lei Rouanet, a principal política pública de incentivo à cultura brasileira. Com ela, perseguimos a missão de assegurar o acesso democrático à produção e à difusão cultural. Ao longo de mais de 3 décadas, a Rouanet permitiu que inúmeras iniciativas culturais, antes inviáveis, ganhassem o mundo. Revelou histórias, preservou tradições e transformou vidas. Lei Rouanet, há 33 anos, tornando a cultura brasileira mais plural, acessível e democrática.
Casal de dançarinos se olham sorridentes. Uma banda orquestrada para de tocar. Logos: Lei Rouanet, Ministério da Cultura, Governo Federal, Brasil, União e Reconstrução.
Onde tem cultura, a Vale está. No poder criativo que nasce dos palcos, orquestras, das artes, das ruas e dos museus. Na valorização das diversas identidades brasileiras e na preservação de memórias. É valorizando a cultura que crescemos e evoluímos juntos. Instituto Cultural Vale.
Respeito, principalmente. Você não vai chegar no rio com sede e vai chegar correndo e vai querer beber uma água. Primeiro você vai chegar e você vai parar, né?
Para nós, na sabedoria do Guarani, se eu tô indo de respeitar o mar ou cachoeira, eu posso me sentir mal depois ou chegar a me afogar ou acontecer acidente ali comigo. Por exemplo, quando eu vou na cachoeira, eu não vou mergulhar rápido, eu vou ficar sentado em cima da pedra, conversa um pouco comigo ali, depois mergulho.
Então tem que já tinha porandor, está de acordo, porandura. Conversar ali com o rio para não se descer correndo, escorregar e cair. Porque o espírito são vivos. Você tem que ter uma concentração para você descer ou atravessar, né? Para ser bem recebido pela natureza, né?
Que tá no seu corpo aquele ruim, tira tudo, né? Cachoeira leva tudo embora. Você fica levinho de novo.
Ministério da Cultura e a Associação Casa Azul apresentam 23ª Flip, Festa Literária Internacional de Paraty. A Flip conta com o benefício da Lei Federal de Incentivo à Cultura, Lei Rouanet, PRONAC 235060, e possui acessibilidade para pessoas com deficiências física, visual e auditiva. Tem patrocínio Jequitibá do Nubank. Patrocínio Figueira da Vale. Patrocínio Guapuruvu do Itaú e da Motiva, por meio do seu instituto. Patrocínio Cedro do Sesc, da MAC Móveis e de O Globo. Patrocínio Araribá, da Globo Livros. Apoio institucional da Prefeitura de Paraty, Governo do Estado do Rio de Janeiro, IFAM, Instituto do Patrimônio Histórico e Artístico Nacional e Museu do Território. É uma criação e realização Associação Casa Azul e Ministério da Cultura, Governo Federal, Brasil, União e Reconstrução. Flip, o encontro da literatura com a cidade.
bit emerges when it's good when it emerges during the reading of the poem. It always produces surprise. In Leminski's poetry, he thought that poems should begin with the first word. So he thought that, for example, that the national anthem should be called Ouvir. It's the way that we can remember and continue to sing in Portuguese, but invention and memory, they're two words which appear repeatedly in the work of these two authors. Maria Negroni, she says, literature is an elegant form of a grudge, and Cristina Rivera Garza writes a book that is almost a source of revenge, and revenge, as we'll see, a necessary form of revenge. So invention and memory and kickback, pushback has a lot to do with these kinds of literature that are likewise difficult to define. They are very close, and they also move apart, and they make this mixture of genres, which is so important. We're going to be talking about all of that now. To chair this session, I'm going to call Guilherme de Freitas, one of the publishers of Subverting magazine. He's a journalist. He is a talent in podcasts. He's done 2 podcasts, one on the Canudos War, precisely when Flip paid tribute to Euclides da Cunha of the Backlands, and one called Territories about Xingu, the indigenous lands in north-central Brazil, the Xingu,
Obrigado, Ana.
and the river.
Boa
Thank you
tarde,
very much,
gente.
Anna. Good afternoon, everyone.
E
Welcome.
vamos já dar as boas-vindas às nossas convidadas de hoje, Maria Negroni e Cristina Rivera Garza.
Cristina Rivera Garza.
Bom, lendo os livros
Reading the
das
books
nossas
by our
convidadas,
guest
eu fiquei
authors,
pensando
I thought to myself,
por onde
where
começar essa conversa.
I should begin this conversation.
Até que num livro da
Until in the book by
Cristina,
Cristina
eu topei com uma
Rivera
imagem
Garza, I
que
found
acho
an
que pode
image
ser
which I think could be a
ponto de
good
partida.
point of departure.
Não?
Channel 3, Channel 3, in Portuguese. Channel 3, Channel 3. It's fine, I can understand.
Melhor. Vamos então.
It's Channel 3.
Vamos resolver aqui.
Okay, let's solve this, okay? Okay, thank you. Now I can hear loud and clear. I was on the wrong channel. Okay. Okay, can you hear? So now let's begin, actually begin. This image that I found in a book by Cristina Rivera Garza could be a good point of departure. I can understand Portuguese. Go ahead. It's better. You might have my headphones. That one over there is yours, right? Okay, you have your own, right? Can you hear okay in Spanish? Yes? Okay, great. It all works out in the end. Okay. Let's reach the point of departure now. Okay, the image that I found in Cristina's book that I want to tell you all that I think is a good point of departure is in the autobiography of Cotton. She narrates the history of her ancestors. They were pioneers, a family saga, and social history of the Mexican border with the United States. This book has just been published by Authentica, translated by Silvia Felix. And Cristina talks about the Guachitilis, it's an indigenous people that she discovers she descends from. It's a nomad people that refuse to bury their dead. What they did, therefore, she describes it, rather than cemeteries or tombs, they took the ashes of their dead in little chamois bags, and they, with them stuck to their bodies, the dead continued to move in movement. And this image of the little chamois bag is a kind of magical artifact which maintains the dead in movement. I think it tells a lot about the books of our guest authors. At the end of the day, as Maria Negroni already wrote, all writing is hacking, and every book is like a box that a writer builds to bury what she calls verbal shadows. Maria wrote this in The Heart of Harm, which is a book It's an alarming book and horrifying book, haunted by the loss of her mother, with whom she had a turbulent and disturbed relationship over the course of her life. Martins Fontes, Paloma Vidal translated it. Okay, and bags to carry ashes, box to bury, shadows. We have writers that are very unique on the stage. They have extensive work, widely admired in the Spanish-speaking world, and finally reaching Brazil in Portuguese. Don't be alarmed or surprised by the presence of the dead in the conversations, because these works have extraordinary vitality, because they move constantly between time and geographic literary frontiers, mixing fiction, poetry, essays, journalism, and handle with great sophistication the instruments that give the name to our roundtable, which is invention and memory. Okay, Cristina Rivera Garza was born in '64 in Matamoros in Mexico, close to the border with the United States. She studied sociology in Mexico City, and since the 1990s, she's a professor at Houston University, where she founded the PhD program in creative writing. The first book of hers, which was launched here, was Liliana's Invincible Summer by Sylvia Felix, is a translation revisiting the family history, but with a turnaround, a twist. In 1990, her sister Liliana Rivera Garza was killed at 20 by a former boyfriend, and 30 years later, Cristina went back to Mexico not only to reopen the investigation into this crime, which had gone unpunished, but to rebuild the fascinating character of her sister Liliana. Last year, this book won the Pulitzer Prize in Memories, the Memories category, and the principles underlying this and other works by her are expressed in the book The Restless Dead, essays launched here by Martins Fontes, translated by Jacques Reiner, who was just with us. María Negroni was born in Rosario in 1951. She lived in the United States for a long time, when she did her PhD in literature. Now she lives in Buenos Aires in creative writing with a master's course. And this career is the backbone for The Heart of Harm. The book with her mother's figure is a shadow, where the narrator never frees herself from her mother, but she builds her own identity based on that shadow and her writer's voice. The voice which owes a lot to Brazilian authors like Clarice Lispector and Cristina César, that she's translated into Spanish, and the honored author Paulo Leminski. And Flip, in addition to Heart of Harm, we've published here The Art of the Air, an anthology of writings on literature and headless authors. And in this book, Maria quotes a phrase that has everything to do with our guests, and I'll close my introduction on this point. To write is like embracing the body which you cannot see. This embrace, Cristina, is dedicated to many dead people that all writers carry with them, those from the family past, the collective history of literary tradition, but this embrace in writing is addressed to us as readers, because this is the feeling that we have left, or the sensation after we've read such strong and moving books by them. So for all those reasons, I want to begin by thanking both of you, and I think I speak for everyone. Maria and Cristina, thank you very much for your presence. It's a huge honor to welcome you here. You're both very welcome to Flip, okay? Let's begin with a reading by Maria. She's going to read Heart of Harm. You're going to hear, if you have your phones, the translation is by Paloma Vidal. Good evening, good afternoon. Before reading, I would like to thank Flip for the beautiful invitation. Brazil is a country that I love and have for a long time. I love this country. I love its literature as well, and it's a joy for me to share this session with Cristina Rivera Garza, whom I've known for a long time. I'm going to read several excerpts from this book. In my childhood home, there are no books. There are roller skates, bicycles, cardboard boxes, but not books. When I say this to my mother, she becomes furious. Of course there were books, she said. I don't know. At any rate, it's not a library like Borges had. There's a certainty of something else, a difficult, beautiful woman occupying the center and perimeter of this house. She has big eyes, lips with red lipstick. Her name is Isabel, but we call her Chichi, which means a toy, a little earring or necklace. The objects that children have fun with. There's an endless scene. I observe her putting her makeup on in the bathroom. It's a fetish to watch this woman. Sometimes hunger and greed and gluttony. It's a riddle. My fascination entertains her. Once in a while, she looks down and she sees me. Only once in a while. My mother, her biggest occupation, the biggest and most harmful occupation of my life, my mother. Later, I said, there are battles that you cannot win or lose. That's my poetics. My mother's body, as soon as she arrived, she said, I'm absent. I called this writing. Entering in search of a heaven which called me closer. If I'm going forward with great fear, always seeking the original night. The senses are darkened. The only truth is not reality. Except for all of that, I have all the autistic stories of the world. Complete emotional garbage. The scabs. This, in a word, is not a book. If it's not a book, what is it? I don't know. The little wax museum one. A doll is taking tea with her mother, who is punishing her because she's not holding the silverware properly because she was impolite, and above all because she cannot make her happy, even if she unveils. The doll studies French, English, handicrafts, theory, and singing. She takes vitamin C. She wears wool blouses, and she's the most deplorably docile creature in the world. The mother has a headache, and in her free moments, she reads the puppets or the doll's education. Other toys emerge. A teddy bear, the conquest of Himalaya, the magic brain, and Ludo, Monopoly, and a complete school made out of wood with the auditorium, the honor group, the report cards, and the grades that the teacher sends, and the flag that the best student will carry. The doll is still being punished, filling 10 pages in a notebook as if she were Miss Perfect, and her mother with a headache that never leaves her in peace. The mother leaves the house in dark, placing covers on the sofas, cloth over the toys so they don't get scratched, or orders her to not make noise during the nap time. The doll closes her eyes. Later, she spends the entire life in the black hole of words. My mother was always owned language. She was the guardian of verbal jewels, with all the prose, the sentences, the adverbs, the adjectives, the nouns, the subjects and predicates especially. a whole class of rhetoric inside the child, who was me. A woman is the man's ditch, you used to say. I have proof of that. You repeated that every day. And I imagined men as beasts, ejaculating day and night in the trunks, in the holes in the trees, in the tree trunks. Thus spoke the author of my days, with her biting words that she used like knives and sometimes like thorns. She guessed the shadow of things in the tartar of thought. She used to say, I only love music. I only think of blood, my face in darkness. She knew where and how to wound. She annihilated her adversary faster than a lynx, and her laceration was extraordinary. A woman helpless with hands raw like mine, who exported anxiety. And I listened to her avidly, sensibly in the shadows. A dead fly, I learned the lesson. I waited my turn to conduct the orchestra of cruel feelings. I have already said. I stole the vocabulary of her, precise and irritating vocabulary, without depriving myself of anyone, in the cage below the rag. I've never seen so much weakness coming and going of the psychological and psychic whole. It was the first talent to approach it, a suicidal mission to reduce it, a false alarm. Do you know what silence is? It's ourselves, he answered. The word is always born from a desire of mutism. It hates norms, writing phrases that are barked, and also prayers. As for me, I've always attempted to unmark myself. I wrote poems which are prose, essays that don't believe in anything, apocryphal biographies, and even 2 attempts at novels which proliferated inwards like a musical fugue. The change of style is a trait from obsession. I also assembled theater plays, little boxes with souvenirs and guessing games for little princes, because poetry is a continuation of childhood by other means, and the miniature is a transportable object, which is ideal for nomadic beings. Of course, all I did was turn around one single passage or landscape. This book is proof of that. Right now, it is embracing a body that it doesn't see. Thank you very much.
Obrigado, Maria.
We see something that denotes something that appears throughout the book in this excerpt, which is the ambivalence of this daughter vis-a-vis her mother. A daughter who feels a mixture of fascination and aversion, repulsion, but rather than hiding this ambivalence, she supports herself on it to be able to write. And what is summarized in the phrase that Anna just quoted in her introduction, literature is an elegant form of hate, and you put it, resentment. You decided after you lost your mother. How was this process, finding a language to work through that, the loss of your mother, and elaborate on it? writing a book is always a mystery for the author, man or woman, and also, first and foremost, I believe that the book wrote itself step by step, somewhat based on the loss of my mother. It's not a book of grief or mourning, but also, in a sense, I had to link and articulate and express something that had always been inside me, this maternal figure, in some sense, constitute me. It's inside me. It's like a bone marrow, right, that permeates me. When I say in this paragraph that I read that my mother was always always possessed language, what I want, she was the owner of it. What I want to acknowledge there is that for every writer today, man or woman, there are two fundamental roots, namely maternal language, which we receive even before we are born as embryos, when we hear the sound, mother's heartbeat, everything that circulates in the mother's body. And at the same time, the other side of what shapes us is our library, books, literature, which comes from the books that have been written already, and of this semiotic part, as Julia Kristeva said, which has to do with music, one's personal music, which performs us, which forms us and shapes us, which is our mother's language. Why I wrote this book, I can't answer that. I don't know how. What I do know that as I was writing it, I felt pain and fear at the same time. At some point, I thought that it was going to be a posthumous book, because, as I always say, not only in relation to this book, but words are creatures which have their own life. And in general, first of all, they're insufficient because they never say what we need to say. They don't go that far. But in addition to being insufficient, oftentimes they are a trap. They lie. They can be cruel also. And this also produces an ambivalence vis-a-vis writing itself. There's a kind of coming and going, to and fro between the desire to say what we want to say, what is there down deep in ourselves, and the moving away from it in order to avoid increasing our pain and sink in pain, and to avoid sinking in pain, because we have the idea of how this is going to be read, what it's going to cause in readers, men or women. So there's an ambivalence there. But in a word, I prefer to stop there. Afterwards, we'll go back to that, okay?
Thank you. You're going to read The Invincible Summer of Liliana?
Okay.
Hello, good afternoon. How are you doing? Hello, it's great to be here. I'm very happy to be here at this literary festival for the first time. And we came from a boat trip, and we drank and ate a lot. So please take this in consideration. I will read, and of course, it's fantastic to be with you, and thank you, Guilherme. Hello, Maria. I will read an excerpt of the translation of an excerpt from Liliana's Invincible Summer, thank you for the translation in Authentica Publishing House and the interpreters. I will reduce my excerpt. You just stop, and no problem. You just read what I'm going to read. This is the book, Liliana's Invisible Summer, about my sister, Liliana Rivera Garza. She was about to graduate. She was 20 years old, and she was about to graduate as an architect. The title is 4th of October, and it's page 38 of the translation in Portuguese. We are in the afterwards, which is long. A day after having been to the Justice Office in the City of Mexico to try to get the copies of the proceeds. The file number is 4913-99007. I go to the cemetery with my parents. It is the 4th of October. Liliana has or is under the earth for more years than those that he lived on earth. It would have been her 51st anniversary, 51 years of age. Libra, ascendant in Capricorn, a cock in the Chinese zodiac. Here we are, the three of us, invited to the invitation of her life and her memories. We bring with us what we need to clean her grave, on which we decided to put her name, a vase, and the name of birth and death engraved in the upper part of the dark rectangle. We always bring the buckets to water the flowers that we bought, as we have done for the last 30 years, buying the flowers in the same place beside the road, outside of the cemetery. We even look like ordinary people, but on the other side of the door, made of iron, we eat, we drink, we walk, we greet people, we celebrate triumphs, we give our condolences, we go to parties, we go to school. Outside, the lives that carry on, go and come, the books, the trips, the anniversaries, daughters and sons. But in here, under the air that is touching the peaks of the volcanoes, and to touch, meditating the inner part of our lungs where their cold wings here inside. We are pure sadness. It is a lie that time goes by. Time doesn't go by. It becomes there. It gets there. It is trapped in the creaks of time that interrupts time and sequence. We haven't aged. We haven't grown older. We will never grow old. Our wrinkles are artificial. They're just hints of the lives that we could have lived, but that were not lived. They went elsewhere. Our white hair, the cavities, the fragile bones, the rigid joints, postures that hide repetition, redundancy, the lyrics. We are trapped in a bubble of shame and guilt, wondering time and again, what didn't we see coming? This is the echo, the light of the sun that is fantastic, always in the autumn. Why couldn't we protect her? The whisper of oyameles, the clarity of the pines. My dad is 84 years old and is using with this stove all of the weeds, trying to take away the weeds, trying to break down the earth when nothing else works. He stops, he breathes, he is sweating, he's kneeling down and weeping silently, always silently he weeps. And I wonder how many times during the day he remembers Liliana. how much money they requested 30 years ago in the Justice Office to continue the investigation of Liliana's femicide. How many times a day or in the year he feels bad because he didn't have the money, the funds. How many times this echoes in his ears, the words, the crude words, the horrible words, the fake, the open words in which the agents and the officials referred to the body of Liliana, to Liliana's life, to Liliana's death. How many times a day he murmurs the word justice. We are never as inert as when you don't have the word. Who in that summer in 1990 would have ever guessed and thought, with the head rising high, with the strength given by the conviction of what is right, what is certain. She was not to blame. She was not to blame, neither for where she was, nor for what she was wearing. In a world in which the word femicide didn't exist, the words spouse, terrorism could describe what I'm saying now. No doubt. Spouse terrorism. The only difference between my sister and me is that I never encountered a murderer. The only difference between her and you.
Obrigado, Cristina.
Thank you, Cristina. In this book, you talk about the rage that you felt with the mourning and the grief for losing your sister, and as other feelings, it is a feeling that we are taught to repress. Women are taught to repress, but anger is also a school. Women's anger is a political and literary strength. I believe that the book starts from anger and rage to look for the language of justice in an excerpt. Justice in many words, to talk about femicides in Mexico, talk about this case and make justice. Liliana is not just a victim. We see her in the book with her complexities, with her dreams, loves, desires. How was the process to find a language, Cristina, to talk about your sister? Thank you for the question. And in fact, one of the most difficult things to tell when you want to tell stories that have been silenced forcefully, stories that patriarchy prefers to remain silent, or they want to include in storytellings and or narratives as a passional crime. And the victim is always guilty, and they always say that the aggressor is not to blame. The first step is to subvert that narrative and to subvert the burden of language. And this is something that literature in general, talking about these crimes or whatever, is the first capacity and power literature has to awaken language, to subvert the narrative and propose other ways to understand not only literature but our lives and ourselves. I wouldn't have been able to write this book without the demonstration and the feminist struggle that have been essential in Mexico and Latin America in the last 10, 20, 30 years. I believe these demonstrations and movements, these struggles, are the ones that coined these words, produced this language that now I can use to understand first, to tell me first of all, and write about what happened, and then, in a second moment, to be able to share this with a wider audience. You remember, many, many years ago, we talked about the things that men told girls in the street when they said something, and that is abuse or harassment in the streets. It's harassment. In the past, we used to say office romance, and that is called labor harassment. So with the translations and the new words that were coined coining these new words, harassment and other words, finally, I was able to say, no, it's not that Liliana made a wrong decision. No, it's not that Liliana didn't see it coming. No, that Liliana is to blame for what happened, or her family is to blame for what happened. This helped me and gave me the elements and the tools to see the small daily violences that are performed until they reach the most lethal form of violence, which is femicide. But you can't see this if you don't name it and if you don't have a language. And we don't produce a language in an isolated manner. Each one of us, language is a collective construction that comes from the streets, from demonstrations, from the struggle. And this is why I took 30 years more even than 30 years to think about the possibility of writing this book. I had tried to write it years before, and it had been a total failure. I never published those books. Good thing I didn't. But I think it is because especially the fact that there exists a vocabulary, a number of concepts, and a narrative coining words that now name gender violence, violence against the bodies of women, in a way that does not blame women for what happened. And something else that I would like to clarify here. It is not only thanks to feminist struggles in Mexico and elsewhere, but I don't want to generalize. The opposition and the moral compass of our societies, it not only produced a language, but it produced a public, an audience. Sometimes you can tell something, but if you don't have someone that will listen, an audience, a public, nothing will happen. But in this case, there is a language to subvert that narrative and talk about those topics and find in the public, in the audience, in the person that's listening to you, the embrace, the recognition. Yes, it happened to me. Yes, this took place years ago and I had no words. Yes, it happened with me and I kept silent. To have the word and have the audience was essential to write this book that was published in 2021. Thank you, Cristina. Maria, as you say in one of the excerpts that you read, the heart of damage is the story of your education as a writer, what you read, your passions, your discoveries. And one of your discoveries, it is very interesting in the book when you create the anti-canon of writers. You were living in the United States, you were married, you had little children, you were doing your PhD degree in crisis with narratives, in crisis with everything, in crisis with books written by men, and you created the anti-canon of writing. And you even put up pictures of these American poets with some writings, the last happy poet, the martyr. What is the importance in your education as a writer to read other women, not only these American writers, but Clarice Lispector, which is a great influence for you too, and the writers that you translated? If I understood, could you repeat the question, please? I didn't understand a word in the translation. You chose the anti-canon of American poets. You had pictures in the walls with words that helped you create the heart of harm. My book, The Heart of Harm, is presented as something that turns around the relationship with a mother. But the book goes beyond the relationship with a mother. It has to do with a formation or an education novel. That is, when I became the writer I am, from that starting point in all of the different moments I went through. So one of the things I talk about in my book is the following. It is to explain the relationship in the beginning with the literary world. So I tell an anecdote I will repeat now. When I left Buenos Aires during the 80s, I left as, quote unquote, as the correspondent of a poetry newspaper from Buenos Aires, an important poetry magazine that was published for more than 20 years and was a really very good poetry newspaper. But when I arrived in New York, I started writing different essays, which was what interested me. I wanted to see what US poets were writing, so I wrote essays. I translated H. and Reach, Elizabeth Bishop, Maria Moore, Rosemary Waldrop, Susan Howell. I would translate and read these authors. And in this poetry newspaper, there was an office that I had in the newsroom, and I had the picture of Walt Whitman, Ezra Pound, T.S. Eliot. I had the pictures of all these men writers, no women writers, in that enormous wall at the office. The same poets that were the ones that managed this publication together with the editor and the directors. So I went back to New York and I said, okay, what am I going to do now? What's going on? Because for me, in the office, there were only pictures of men. And as you said, Cristina, things change. What's going on now? Women at that time, I don't know which was the feminist wave, the second wave, but feminism was very important at that time. So I wanted to find in these women poet writers traits, something, I wouldn't say role models, but yes, I wanted answers. I wanted answers to the questions I asked myself. As you said, I was a woman with 2 little children. I was following my PhD in university. I worked. I remember everything that I did back then. I went to the supermarket. I worked out at the gym. I did thousands of things every single day. And I was thinking, how can you be a female writer with all of these responsibilities and chores? And actually, the landscape in the story of these women was not that promising. Many of these poets I mentioned committed suicide. We had women that committed suicide, women that had become writers, leaving their children behind. A poet I admire, H.T., she had a daughter that she named Perdita and left her in a boarding school in Europe, and she never saw her. And there were women that had no children, as Virginia Woolf, women that had no spouses. I said, how can you integrate all of these aspects in being a female writer? I mean, this is a question feminism is still working on, because this combination is not clear at all. So what you're asking me is this. Well, I was looking in these women, and I would put up the pictures of these women. This was my anti-canon that was the opposite of the wall in the editing room of the newspaper in Buenos Aires that was filled with male pictures. It was just a gesture, and I understood later on that they had done what they could at that time. These are women, and if you think about it, these women, and even if we think about our mom's generation, they lived a totally different situation to our situation, and our daughter's generation is totally different from us. Each generation produces or encounters new ways to answer this. Yes, Maria, it's true.
Let's go back to Clarice in just a minute, but let's talk about Cristina. I'd like to ask you, Cristina, based on this idea of the anti-canon of writers, I'd like to ask you a question about autobiography of Cotton. There's a character that has a lot to do with this idea. The autobiography of Cotton, the life of her grandparents in north of Mexico, working in the cotton fields in north of Mexico. And a character is Petra Peña, the first woman in the family that learned to write, your grandmother. And nobody knows how she learned how to write. The autobiography of Cotton, and she had this diary. Just imagine this scene in the book. She was writing while the men were kind of alarmed looking at her. How can a woman be writing, right? And in your book, you talk about the difficulty with the research to reconstitute the story of all your grandparents, grandmothers, and grandfathers, but the difficulty was greater with the women, grandmothers. Could you tell us your research process to reconstitute these stories, and what were the difficulties that you faced in that process? Yes, of course. Yes, of course. I have to confess now that it's a historian's job. I began to study history because I thought that I was going to learn a lot of things and that this was going to teach me to write. And I hope that here there aren't many historians in the audience, but it so happens that we learn a lot about certain things. Not everything. It's necessary to have a wider vision or view. As a historian, what I learned was the approach and the taste for archives, approach to archives and the taste for archives. I believe that those who have had experience with archives and they are familiar with archives, you know quite well that we enter into the archives and the stories are not complete. We just gather and collect pieces of paper, and the story, not the entire story is there. There's some data in the archives, other data in other archives or other files, and we may find one fragment here, another fragment there, and with our imagination, we can build a story which is approximately relevant. I was born on the Mexican side, on the border between Mexico and the United States, and I had heard a lot of stories, echoes of stories about what in our family, what they called those times, those old times, the times of cotton in the cotton fields in northern Mexico. And as a historian, I did my thesis on a mental hospital, La Castañeda. It's a famous mental hospital established in 1902, but it didn't do research on the process of migration and the workers in the cotton fields in this same border. Why not? Because I thought to myself, okay, fine, that I already knew that story, that it was part of my family, that I really knew this story. But it appears to me that suffice it to begin to do research in order to understand that everything that we don't know. I always say that what allows me to write so much and books on my grandparents, who were the autobiography of Cotton, or Liliana's Invincible Summer. What moved me was an issue of identity work in research work, amorous, loving research, and where I worked and dwelt on this for many years. This research work is a job, a task of care, monitoring and accompanying, following that we offer to our dead and those who are willing and able to penetrate into our books. And there was a lot of that for the autobiography of Cotton. I went to study and I researched in archives which were stored on file on the border as well. There was a state, the border state, which truly today suffers because of the drug traffic, but not only the drug traffic. I did what the anthropologists know how to do quite well, field research, traveling, and what journalists do quite well as well. I held interviews, I read diaries and letters. I did everything that was possible. In epistolary research, I found a novel by Jose Revueltas, the great Mexican rebel writer, a communist and everything, from the mid-20th century in Mexico, which perchance when I was 19 years of age, who was in this little town in the north of Mexico, which was called Estación Camarón, because they told him that there was going to be a strike there, and my grandparents were there, and in this little town, Estación Camarón, my grandparents had gone from the Altiplano from central Mexico to the north of Mexico in search of a better life, and they met there. They met each other with Jose Revueltas, and I don't know if they greeted each other, if they actually met, if they know their names, but I'm a novelist, okay? So I say, I bet that this actually happened, and that perhaps some of these characters, which are called, perhaps some of these characters were my grandparents. And I say all this because it interests me. It's a book that is, these are personal books, but not individual books, not based on the concept of the individual. For me, is a neoliberal concept of the individual, as if we exist as individuals or alone. We are crisscrossed by and permeated by different social and affective relations, and also we perceive and to know the experience of someone. All of this is to enter into this mesh, this network. It's a plural practice, and we can guarantee through research a certain kind of proximity, which is never complete. There's always something, a document that's missing. We have some doubts, and unfortunately, the poor people like my family don't leave so many letters or documents behind like other social classes, and I had to turn to what the North American theoretician says. In other words, in the middle of all these documents and interviews and etc., I got everything that I could, and when there was a void or a doubt or a gap where the abyss began, I skipped over it. With the help of fiction, I skipped and switched into the other side, and apparently the effort is to approach, when never possible to do, with a lot of material, with this migratory experience, with migration, and fortunately we have fiction to assist us. So this literary leap was essential, and I say this also in relation to the Liliana's Invincible Summer. I read institutional archives, and I had access to what now what was called the effective archive of Liliana. I knew where the box was located, but finally I had the necessary strength to open this box. I was searching for information, but I found a rich archive or file with letters addressed to my sister, with artifacts and objects and things underlined, and the archive against the state. It goes beyond the state, and which builds a kind of subjectivity, not as a subject, a state of subjectivity, but as a member of a community, and thanks to that, I was able to write the book. I've already said this, but I repeat it here, not about Liliana, but with her. It's a task, a job of sorority, and apparently literature is strong and powerful in that sense, and it has the capacity to embrace, to unite and combine and have the awareness that we're part of something bigger, which is language, and the possibility of subverting in order to tell this story in a different way.
Maria, Cristina talked about these. Maria talked about these leaps in which you have to leap forward and get where the archive will not take you. You also do that because in the epigraph of your book, The Heart of Harm, you quote Clarice Lispector, "I will create what happened to me," quoting Clarice Lispector. Tell us about your relationship with Clarice Lispector that is not only present in The Heart of Harm, but in so many of your books, with so many fantastic words and quotes by Clarice Lispector, like, for instance, "Writing is horrible." You quote her in one of your books. What is the importance of Clarice in your work, and why do you quote her so much in your books? Does it explain your process? Well, actually, it's not that I talk. I mean, the quote is, "I will create what happened." I will create, which is an extraordinary epigraph for the book. I will create what happened, because you're saying in the same word and the same phrase, to create and happen. I will create what happened. She's saying, I am not going to write, I'm not going to tell you what happened. She is using a verb which is like inventing. I will invent what happened. She is opening a crack. And this is what we know, and it is the distance between the word and the world. The word is not a copy. It does not replicate. So I believe that Clarice Lispector's writing questions referentiality. She is not trying to tell us something that happened, but rather she is trying to work in the core of language, as Cristina mentioned before, permeates us. But I would say from a very unique place. How can you position yourself in front of reality, whatever reality might be, as Cristina was telling us? It is the situation of her grandparents, her sister. No matter what topic it is, no matter what the subject matter of the book is, there is a way to take stance with reference to language. Language is what is taking place outside in society. It is not detached from reality. There are ways to name things that change things and modify what is happening. So I quote Clarice exactly because I want to say that what this book tells is not something that happened. I don't know what happened. I'm not sure. Within the book, the mother says that that's not the case. She says, no, that's wrong. No, we did have books. No, we had dogs. So I'm never sure that what I remember or I think I remember is true. I don't know. So actually, I mean, and this is very complicated. Let's try to make it more simple. When you're trying to write a book, there is a task. Unlike what Cristina is telling us, for me, more than going to research facts and files, my procedure is like an internal blindness. I encounter the book as if I am in a dark hole in the blind. I don't know which way it will go. I trust in my writing, and the writing will take me where I want to go. There is no direct relationship between what I want to tell and how I do it. I tell it as I can, from my blindness, from my ignorance. I don't know if I make myself clear. Clarice Lispector is a writer that while you read her, she is totally detached from the plot. Her books, whole books, as Nestor Sanchez would say, the Argentine writer, you can't tell the plot over the phone. There are novels that you can't tell what they're about. It doesn't matter what it is about. There is effervescence and eruption of language and uniqueness and singularity that I would say, Cristina, individual. I'm not sure that singularity, I mean, that's a total different debate. I mean, I'm not sure that singularity is neoliberal. I do not agree with that. But in any case, it's basically that. What I wanted to say is that each writer or female writer has a world that is built with a specific language. And this cannot be translated or transferred to any other person, another person that is nourished and built from whatever situation it is, but we can have the same scene, the same society, and the products will be different because the voice that narrates, the voice that writes, is the inner voice that has a unique music to it. And that is what interests me in the books I read. Cristina, you are a specialist in the story of the Mexican-US border. You wrote about this process in the beginning of the 20th century, in the turn of the 21st century. You lived there all your life. And I can't avoid this question. You're coming from Texas to participate in this festival. How do you feel when you read that your country is under attack from the Trump administration? How do you feel about the migrants from your country? How do you feel about this, Cristina? Wow. You don't want to get me started, because now that if I start, I'll never end. Don't get me started. When they ask me this, I start by saying, it's as horrible as it sounds. There is no exaggeration at all. I've lived in the United States maybe as many years as you, Maria. I arrived in the United States in the last years of the 80s, in 1988, and you arrived there in 1985. Well, we've been there in the same time. I didn't live in New York as you did. I lived for many, many years in San Diego, in California, Southern California, and for more or less 9 years. The other day, they asked me, and I said 5 years. And I said, no, it's almost 10. That's how my memory worked, sometimes playing tricks on me. Yes, in fact, what I consider is the hate capitalism that is enrooted with politics of cruelty has to do with daily life. I live in a Mexican neighborhood in Houston, which is a large and sprawled out city and very diverse. People from Houston say that Houston is the most diverse city in the States. I don't know, we should ask people in Chicago, in LA, but well, people in Houston say that. And just to give you a concrete idea of the scenes that we see there, for instance, one of the things that I love really, is that in the weekends, we would have a barbecue. The North Mexican non-vegetarian tradition, I'm sorry. So we would have this barbecue and the music that has to do with getting together, eating together, talking together, and this has disappeared. We don't see this anymore in the streets because nobody walks in Houston. Everybody drives a car. You don't see people, but my other senses that survived, smell, here, we're always alert to this presence of these barbecues in the street. And they have disappeared because they are afraid to be noticed in the streets. And they don't want to be identified. And this disappearance is a very serious matter, very painful, serious. And it is one of the most notorious examples of the growing fascism that is underway not only in the United States but elsewhere in the world. But I should also clarify, and I don't want to end on a sad note, depressed, imagine to live like this every single day. When I arrived in Houston 10 years ago, because I was offered to be the head of a creative writing course, a PhD course in Spanish, the first of its kind in the United States. And that's what I'm doing. As all universities in the United States, we are the target of focused and direct aggressions. And another thing of contemporary neoliberalism, apart from individuality, are these frequent attacks. We are under attack at the university. But we have to fight this struggle every single day. It is important, as feminists say, to put the body in the struggle. And for me, to work at the university, to be the chair of creative writing, literature, to be a faculty at a university in the United States is activism. It is a way of empowering my job in a language that is considered with pride a working language. It is considered a working language, and it is a language of thought, of reflection, and creative production. So to have this stronghold, this banner, if I didn't have this, it wouldn't be unbearable to keep on living in this country. It would be unbearable. And that is what I do. I fight my daily fight there. It is more complicated, increasingly complicated. If what I am saying is on record, they won't let me go back to the US. I will have to come back here and live by the river and eat fantastic food. That is, I mean, the siege is increasingly smaller, and the daily struggle for the public space for us that speak Spanish and look Latino, look Mexican, have this profile, is a daily struggle. Of course, I have to make a clarification. Since I want to work at this university, it is different from working in the construction of buildings or being a gardener or working in different areas, differences and privileges that come with the fact that I have a tenure at university. But now, right now, I think that these rates are very equal for everyone. And to create new solidarities, create new spaces of collective contention, of expression. We will need this, not only in the United States, but in many countries in Latin America, no doubt.
Gente, muito obrigado.
Thank you. 4, 3, 2, 1. Time is up. Thank you. Thank you, both of you. Thank you. Thank you, Cristina. Thank you, Maria.